Well, good morning. Welcome to the garden. Even though it may be a ridiculous thing to do on a beautiful day like today, we're glad you're here and glad you've been here with us. And I want to say a special word of thanks to Rob French for filling in for me last week. Let's give him a round of applause. I've had several folks mention about how meaningful that was to think about the influence that we have on people all around us. So thanks, Rob. I appreciate your doing that. You know, in real life, he's an engineer, so it takes a lot of extra time and energy to be able to do this. So I'm very grateful. So I could have a Sunday to just be here and enjoy the service myself. Well, I don't know about you, but if you've been around any time close to Halloween here, you've probably heard me admit that Halloween is one of my least favorite holidays. And it didn't just start now with all these people ringing the doorbell wanting treats. It began when I was a kid. I really didn't like it very much growing up. I was afraid of it, I guess. I don't know. It felt it was always a time when it was dark and cold and people wore all these weird things. And, well, I just didn't care for it. Now, I've grown up a little bit and I've outgrown that particular fear. And also, I have to say that I can appreciate a little bit differently how kids enjoy Halloween so much, because they do like the goodies and the treats they get as a result of it, and they really enjoy dressing up in costumes, as some of you have done this morning, and as you've seen our band has done, and I'm dressed like a zebra, so I think that works. You know, our daughter really loved Halloween as she was growing up, and her daughter really loves it. So I've begun to enjoy it a little bit more because of their appreciation and enjoyment of it. Well, while I can now say that Halloween isn't scary for me, I suppose there are other things that are scary for us in one way or another. And I have to say to you that I don't willfully and willingly expose myself to things that cause fear. For example, I don't go to horror movies, and I don't read thriller mystery novels. I don't like the way it upsets my equilibrium. And I know people, and you probably do too, who like to do all sorts of daring things, like ride the highest, wildest roller coaster they can find, or bungee jump off a bridge, or jump out of an airplane. And while I admire the courage it takes for them to do that, I have to tell you, that's not on my bucket list of things that I want to do at all in life. And yet, I guess if we were to go around and ask you, that everybody would admit that there's one thing or more that we're afraid of. There's something we can name. You know, for some people, it's snakes. Maybe it's the dark. Maybe it's storms. Maybe it's going for a job interview. Or perhaps it's just trying something new, stepping out into a new thing. And it's a difficult thing for us to do. I know people who are afraid of speaking in public, and I can certainly identify with that. As I thought about that particular fear, it took me back to years ago now, to the very first time I ever delivered a message over at St. Luke's Church. Now, I had finished seminary, I'd had preaching classes, and had dealt with the critique and everything okay, but this was an entirely different game, I'll tell you. It was like we were in the big time now, and my colleagues had set the bar so high that it was really intimidating. They were such good speakers and always offered such impactful, meaningful messages that it was really, truly intimidating to step and stand where they had stood and to try to come close to sharing anything that was at all meaningful to anyone. Well, it seemed that the only thing I could really talk about that day was fear. And the Bible passage I chose was the passage that I decided to use again today. Now, this is one you may be familiar with. It's about a story that's often referred to as Jesus calming the storm. Let's look at our version. Late that day, he said to them, "Let's go across to the other side." They took him in the boat as he was. Other boats came along. A huge storm came up. Waves poured into the boat, threatening to sink it. And Jesus was in the stern, head on a pillow, sleeping. They roused him, saying, "Teacher, is it nothing to you that we're going down?" Awake now, he told the wind to pipe down and said to the sea, "Quiet, settle down." The wind ran out of breath. The sea became smooth as glass. Jesus reprimanded the disciples. "Why are you such cowards? Don't you have any faith at all?" Well, they were in absolute awe, staggered. "Who is this anyway?" they asked. "Wind and sea at his beck and call." Well, there are several things to consider in this particular Bible passage. Now, the Sea of Galilee was known as a place where there were sudden violent storms that came up. And the thing that's always kind of surprised me about this story is that at least 3 or 4 of these disciples were fishermen. And they had fished the Sea of Galilee. And I'm sure they'd been out on a boat in one of those storms before. Nonetheless, they were scared to death. They were afraid they were going to drown. And so they called out to Jesus, and he calmed everything down. And then he said, do you not have faith? What's wrong with you? What's going on here? Now, there are a couple different levels on which we could interpret this particular story. There is, of course, probably the simplest, that it was a miracle of Jesus actually taking away the wind and the storm and calming everything that way, which would have been considered a miracle. But you've been here before. You know that probably isn't my preferred understanding of this particular passage. Instead, I would like to dig a little deeper there. And maybe a good way to start would be to think about something that Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote. He said, "The wise one in the storm prays God not for safety from danger, but for deliverance from fear." Now, in my mind, that really encapsulates the message in its entirety of that particular Bible story, because I think that's what Jesus was doing. His calming presence calmed the others in the midst of what was going on. Now, I suppose it's possible the storm could have left as quickly as it came, and it may have actually visibly calmed everything down. But I also think that's very possible that because he was calm, he could convey to them the assurance that God was with them and that they would be okay no matter what happened. And I think that's the underlying message that comes out of this passage, that no matter what we face, all the uncertainties, all the fears, all the questions that we have in the course of life, that we'll be okay because God is with us, even if we're not aware that God is here. The most important thing when we think about fear, it seems to me, is that we not let it control us. Because if we do, it paralyzes us completely. Catherine Patterson said, "To fear is one thing. To let fear grab you by the tail and swing you around is another." We cannot allow fear to manage us. We have to manage the fear. And that means that we have to get ourselves in a place where we are calmer, where we are positive, and where we're less fearful. Now, I read several different articles about fear as I was preparing for today, and one of them suggested that we change our understanding of the word fear, that actually that word, F-E-A-R, could stand for false evidence appearing real. And if you stop to think about it, very often that's what's going on. We misunderstand or we misinterpret something. We think it's something to be afraid of when it really is relatively harmless. Now, that's not to say that there aren't dangers out in our world, because of course there are dangers there. But I venture to say that the dangers that we face are not as many and not as serious as some of us would have others believe. So I think we let our imaginations go wild sometimes and become afraid of something that probably really doesn't have any cause to be afraid of it. Well, that's one way. And then there was somebody else who suggested that we think of the word fear in a different way, with the F standing for focus, the E standing for expose, the A for approach, and the R for rehearse. And basically what that's suggesting is that we begin by calming ourselves. We focus our energy. We can't make good decisions if we're panicked and if we're frightened to death. We have to make ourselves calm and to slow down, to breathe deeply, and to make as wise a decision as we possibly can. When it talks about expose ourselves, it's meaning willingness to experience the fear, to let ourselves be afraid, because that is a normal human reaction. That's a normal human emotion. So allow ourselves to be afraid if things come up that way, but to keep going anywhere, to acknowledge the situation and not try to avoid it, to approach it, is what we've said there. I was thinking about something that Carver McGriff used to say. It was a little saying he had about when you're afraid of something, that maybe you just should whistle past the graveyard. Now, sometimes people are afraid of walking by a cemetery after dark. And so if that's what you were afraid of, that maybe what you should do is focus on the whistling part, and then you wouldn't be thinking so much about the graveyard, and you go to and through the fear and come on out of it. So I think that may be something that we want to keep in mind there. And then when we've done that a time or two or three or four, what we've done has been practicing living with our fear and facing our fears and moving forward. And once we've done that, we become more confident with it. We gather a little bit more courage and we keep going. I think it's vitally important that we find a way to deal with the fears that all of us have, one kind of fear or another, and to begin to keep moving forward with it. Otherwise, we pull back from life. We don't fully engage in life, and we don't live life the way I think God intends us to live it, because we're always afraid that we're going to fail or that we're going to fall or something is going to go wrong. Bertrand Russell said, "Those who fear life are already 3 parts dead." And unfortunately, I fear that's true because we're not really living life. If we play it safe, we're not really living the way we're intended to live. You know, I think it's most important that we experience whatever comes to us and become more confident, that we allow ourselves to deal with the fears, and that we grow in courage and energy and recognize the resources we have to deal with it. Someone sent me this quote about courage. It's from the late Maya Angelou, and it says this: "Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage." You see, when we gather our courage, that means that we feel the fear, but we face our fear and we deal with it anyway. That means that we're willing to leave behind the familiar and step out into new territory. It means that we keep on keeping on. We keep moving. We keep trying to go forward. All it takes is courage to be able to take the first step and then the next and the next. This is something that's been on my mind quite a bit lately because, as you are well aware, I think that both the garden and I are on the verge of a new future. We're moving into a new day here. And it's easy to become fearful because we don't know what lies ahead, either for the garden nor do I for myself. And so it is easy to become fearful. But I think if we want to move forward, what we have to do is step forth with courage and with faith. God has brought the garden to where it is today, and God will not abandon us now. You can count on that. What we need to do is surround one another in prayer and to support one another in the best way we have possible. You know, I've said this before, but I don't know that I've ever said it with more depth of meaning and more fervently than I do right now. And that is, we will be okay, all of us, because God is with us. Have no fear.